Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm back tonight to continue to advocate for solutions on one of the issues that is most pressing in my community, and that is continued rising homelessness. Now, how bad are things right now? Back in 2018, we had just over 300 or so people living unsheltered across Waterloo Region. That point and count study was repeated in 2021. It more than tripled, Madam Speaker.
Can I invite members to exit the chamber for the proceedings to continue, adjournment proceedings to continue without noise? Thank you. The Honourable Member for Kitchener Centre.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As I was saying, we more than tripled the number of folks living unsheltered in just those 3 years. There's another point and count study happening right now. And folks, support workers across Waterloo Region expect that number, as do I, to be significantly higher. Now, how did it get so bad? We need to be talking about that in this place so that we can focus on real solutions. One of the reasons it's gotten so bad is because governments of multiple parties over the last number of decades have dramatically cut funding to build more affordable housing. In fact, it was as of 1995 where the funding was cut significantly. It leads to the point where in Ontario, 93% of all affordable homes were built before 1995. It also means that across the country, our stock of social housing is now the bottom of the G7 at around 3.5%. But not only have we stopped building the affordable housing we need, governments have allowed for the erosion of the existing supply of affordable housing. Research from the Canadian Housing Evidence Collaborative shows that in my community, for every one new unit of affordable housing getting built, we are losing 39. Worse still than that, we're seeing the financialization of housing. As housing is being commodified, we're seeing more and more large corporate landlords buying up and profiteering from homes that used to be affordable, raising rents and evicting folks. And, of course, we also have governments that aren't investing enough to prevent and reduce homelessness. Now, this is something that very specifically the Parliamentary Budget Officer has looked at and has given numbers for parliamentarians to consider. To get even just a 50% reduction in chronic homelessness across the country, we need to see the federal government increase its funding 7 times of what it currently is. The PBO estimates that that would require an additional $3.5 billion a year. The good news is that we can afford this. We can look to other programs this government currently funds. We can look at subsidies to the oil and gas industry, for example. There's $18 billion there. We can look at the Trans Mountain Pipeline. Well, that's $34 billion more there. We can look at the military, $26 billion going up to $50 billion. 2%, baby. All we need here is just $3.5 billion for unsheltered folks. We can look to move dollars to those who need it the most. My question tonight is, will this government do better by those living unsheltered and commit the funds we need to close this gap?
No. Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Madam Speaker, thank you very much for the opportunity. I first of all want to thank my friend, who I've known for a number of years now. I know his points come from a sincere place. He does care about his community, and he does specifically care about the issue of housing. He began by talking about the 1990s and cuts that were made. He's right. Previous governments, Liberal and Conservative, let down the country when it comes to the issue of housing. This government has sought to do something quite different by being the first government really in a generation to understand that there is a federal role with respect to affordable housing. He mentions also the Parliamentary Budget Officer. That's very good. He mentions the report specifically of the Parliamentary Budget Officer. And that's a good thing too, because in that report it talks, among other things, about the Reaching Home initiative. This is the signature program when it comes to the federal government's response to help communities on the issue of homelessness. And what do we know about Reaching Home? As a result of it, 87,000 people that were on the street are no longer on the street now, Madam Speaker. That includes people in his community of Kitchener-Waterloo. People who are housed now with supportive housing. What does that mean? Mental health support on site. Support for physical health care, nurses, for example, on site. Quite often, job training programs provided on site or very close to the facility that's being funded. That's how we get things done. That's how we build homes to ensure people have a roof over their head. He talks about encampments. This federal government put forward $250 million in the budget of 2024 to support communities. It's a scourge. It is not acceptable. We have to respond. And what we've been clear on is that provinces need to match that funding in order to maximize the number of communities that can be supported. I care about this. The government cares about this. I think all members of Parliament do care about it. But the record is clear. We are responding in a way that the Conservatives would never do. They talk about cuts. In fact, they presented what they call a housing plan, little more than something written on the back of a napkin that the Leader of the Opposition put forward in a private member's bill that doesn't talk about homelessness at all. There is more to do, Madam Speaker. We are committed to that kind of a vision of social justice, and we will get it done.
The honourable member for Kitchener Centre.
Madam Speaker, first of all, the Parliamentary Secretary makes important points, and I hope I made it clear in my speech. It's not that this government is doing nothing. In fact, they have increased funding to reduce homelessness across the country. The reality is right now is that the result is over the last number of years, we've tripled the number of folks living on shelter. And so the results in my community means that more folks are hurting, are living on the streets, and we haven't seen the results of that funding. And so, Madam Speaker, my question remains to the member. First of all, does he recognize the reality that in Waterloo Region, we've tripled the number of folks living unsheltered? And will he advocate to step up the funds that have been put on the table to ensure that we get to a point where we achieve the goal we both want, which is to at least cut homelessness in half over the coming years?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
I certainly recognize, Madam Speaker, that in that member's community and in my community, there is homelessness. Where it exists, it's unacceptable. We have a responsibility, a moral responsibility, to respond. And yes, this government has made critical investments in that regard, but there's more to do. I would point out, however, that his community is being supported, and we want to continue in that vein. I'll point to specific examples, though, because he unfortunately failed to cite any. I think that there is honesty on his side where he says that there's a recognition that he has about what the federal government is doing, but at 82 Wilson Avenue in Kitchener, there's $2.4 million of support that housed 48 people. Kitchener Housing Inc. Repairs received $1 million for 500 units that were either built anew or repaired. Finally, he is quite an advocate, I'll say this, on co-op housing. The Beaver Creek Housing Cooperative in Waterloo, 50 people are living there as a result of a $750,000